It seems like it's coming more from internationals that have committed to organizing, that have put the resources into building the labor movement and are doing so in a very aggressive fashion.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Stuart Eimer is a co-chair of the Department of Sociology and associate professor at Widener University. Immanuel Ness, who we're still waiting on, is a professor of political science at Brooklyn College. Stuart, welcome to the Valley Labor Report. Thanks for taking the time.
Here with you today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So you wrote with Immanuel this book over 20 years ago. I don't know how you feel about me saying that. Central Labor Councils and the Revival of American Unionism, Organizing for Justice in Our Communities. And, you know, I guess the first question to ask is, what made you want to write about Central Labor Councils in 2000, 2001?
I can tell you it's been reissued in 2016, so it still is relevant.
I agree. I just read it last year, so.
Yeah, I was happy to see that, because sometimes I feel old. So what made us write and edit the book was a combination of things. There had been a change in the direction of the AFL-CIO in, I guess it was 96, 95, with the new voices of John Sweeney. And you saw a lot of new energy, both on the ground, but also in the culture about unions and trying to reinvigorate the movement. And some of this movement was happening at the regional level all across the country, right? The book details case studies that occurred in Milwaukee, San Jose, Seattle, all over, in Atlanta in the South. The last person was just talking about the sort of invisible history of unions in the South. And he's right, there's a long and rich history. And we felt as though these regional labor bodies had an important role to play in all sorts of arenas, whether it be coordinating local politics, trying to create living wage movements, trying to articulate and advance economic development agendas. And we just saw this happening. And then I was actually a graduate student at the time and was doing research on labor councils. The book has a kind of a history of labor councils in it that I wrote. And we were, I don't know, became aware that this is sort of an invisible part of the labor movement, that it's been a key institutions really since the beginning, since the 1880s, and they've played a role in many cities, very, very important roles, but we're kind of invisible. So we were committed to trying to shine a light on the role of these institutions historically, and some of what they've done, some of the challenges they faced, and then to really kind of highlight many of the accomplishments that were occurring in the late 90s, early 2000s. So that book was, I guess, Manny's idea, and we met each other, and then I was just really tapped into this stuff that was happening, and we put the book together, and it was pretty well received, and you know, still relevant today, I hope.
I definitely agree. It's really interesting. You know, I don't know if I mentioned this in the emails, but I'm president of the Labor Council here in North Alabama. My co-host here, Adam, is one of our trustees and chair of the political committee. And, you know, so I definitely found some things that I want to try to do here. And so, you know, you mentioned that it's kind of something of a compilation of case studies. And so I'm interested in what some of your key takeaways were as you were, you know, compiling, because it's, you know, a series of, it's not all written by you, it's written by several different authors, and then edited by you and Ness. And so what were some of the key things that you took away back in 2001 when you wrote it and you compiled it? What were some of the things that you were thinking as you were compiling and writing this book?
Well, I think a lot of the lessons learned both about the past and about what was going on then, and that, you know, quite honestly, are still relevant, is that there's just a lot of opportunity at the regional level. that
Hmm.
a lot of our economic development happens regionally, right? We try to track companies into particular regions. People tend to live and stay in the regions in which they were born, right? People have roots there. Um, Political capacity at the local and county level are often, I don't know, underappreciated, how important they are, how much work can be done at the city council level, at the county board level. Um, and that in all of these cases, what you saw were leadership, often, newer leadership, people who'd often kind of cut their teeth and become trained as activists in the 60s, had taken or been elected to positions of power in their councils. And they just saw the opportunity that, here we are in, so let's say, Milwaukee, and we can't address the problems as just a labor movement or as one particular union. We need to begin to really forge ties between teachers and nurses and carpenters and
Hmm.
bus drivers and try to get unions to think of themselves not just in terms of their own parochial collective bargaining interests, which of course are important. It's really the main reason local unions exist, and they're legally obligated to really pursue that. But that labor councils provide a space for folks to come together and talk across their unions, to talk across their particular struggles, to learn about each other, struggles, to support each other when people are organizing, people are going on strike, etc. But then the Labor Council also gives the labor movement an opportunity to connect with environmentalists, with housing activists, with local political actors, and to try to broaden the scope of what unions as individual locals can do and to build a movement. And really, that's what the role of labor councils has been since the 1880s, is to try to fashion individual unions into a broader workers' movement. And in the best case scenario, those workers' movements are forming alliances with other stakeholders in the community. And, the book details whether it's Milwaukee or Atlanta or in San Jose, Seattle, you know, different coalitions that came together and different issues that were being pursued. But what they had in common was that this council was out of, separate local unions, creating a much more powerful labor movement. And that labor movement was then building alliances beyond labor and trying to address, a broad range of issues in their particular metropolitan area. And we saw that that had potential. And I still think it has a lot of potential. Um, and it's still very important. I do. I can run on and on and on. I'll just say one more thing. I'll let you come back in. But I'm doing research on labor council, or not on labor council, on SEIU organizing in Charlotte, in the South. And a lot of SEIU's airport organizing depends on building the capacity at the local level to get, say, the city of Philadelphia to mandate a certain wage, or the
Hmm.
Port Authority in New York to mandate a certain wage. They're actually taking wages out of collective bargaining and they're becoming politically mandated. And for that strategy to work in places like, let's say, Charlotte, you need to build political capacity of the sort that unions no longer have in many cities, particularly in the
Hmm.
South, where unions tend to have much less power and lower levels of density. And the Labor Council has become a crucial point for um, people trying to organize the airports to go, to share the struggles with other people, to get support from existing unions for pickets and whatnot, but also then to begin to build the political capacity to try to move some of these local city councils, county boards in a more pro-labor direction. That no one union can do it alone. There's a role for these labor councils. That's a
Right.
mouthful, but I hope I answered your question.
No, absolutely. And pivoting a little bit from that final topic and going back to something that you mentioned earlier and something that's touched on in the book about organizing capacity, that's been something that I have been most interested in wanting to support my affiliates and see the affiliates support each other is in organizing capacity and helping each other, build our unions, organize new workplaces and things like that. And that's actually one of, I think, the most difficult things structurally for a labor council to do. And, I find that labor councils across the country, they fall into a really easy kind of niche where they become, Democratic Party endorsement machines, and they, write $500 checks in municipal elections and $1,000 checks in state elections and things like that. And then maybe on, it's some of the higher levels, maybe they have, voter outreach programs and things like that. But I find that most of the engagement is on kind of the political level. And I think there's a really important role for that. And central labor councils make a really intuitive kind of, they intuitively make sense as a place for labor to engage politically. But I do think that there's a really undertapped, that labor councils represent an untapped opportunity for organizing support. And one of the chapters speaks to that specifically, building organizing capacity at the King County Labor Council, by Jonathan Rosenblum. And so I wonder if you could talk about that chapter specifically, and then generally what you see as opportunities for labor councils to support organizing work and what some of the structural difficulties of that are.
I cannot speak to that chapter. I apologize. It's been a long time since
Sure.
I
No
engaged
worries.
it, but I can speak to the topic. And I agree with what you just stated, that often the political is the most obvious. And I agree that often the political is woefully inadequate, right? They're just endorsement machines that send letters to people that mean almost nothing. And we have evidence that getting a letter means nothing. When you can actually do more focused GOTV things, hi, I'm a carpenter. I see here that you're a nurse.
Mm.
Or are you aware of this election? And you're knocking on doors and doing phone calls. That's something CLCs can do that really no one else is positioned to do. And we know from evidence, research that's done by Zulo at Michigan, that has an effect. It matters. It will increase turnout, and that's important. On the organizing, my experience was that a lot of local unions don't know how to organize, and it's still my experience that there's, you know better than I do as a labor council leader that most unions they don't have full-time staff. They're run by people who are already working full-time jobs, and then they're also the union president. They may have never organized anybody. They've been part of a union that's been there for however long, and they don't have the capacity or the knowledge really to put someone on staff to try to figure out how to build density in their particular sector. And labor councils offer an opportunity as an institution to have or to supplement that capacity. There was a time when I was most familiar with Milwaukee, where they had garnered the resources to put an organizer on staff, and that organizer could be utilized by different locals who needed guidance, who needed support, who needed
Mm.
capacity. And I remember this woman telling me how there were people would just tell her, "We have no idea what to do. We don't know how to organize. Why would you know how to organize if it's not something you've ever done before?" And labor councils, being the closest, to the ground, in the ideal world, would have people on staff who could then be utilized around the region to help initiate, to support, to guide. That takes resources. And one of the things that has frustrated me is that, it's voluntary affiliation to labor councils. They're often under-resourced. They don't have the money and to give them the capacity they need to facilitate new organizing. I think short of actually having organizers on staff, one thing unions can do or labor councils can do is mutual support. So organizing is hard, right? It's a big deal. People face tremendous pushback from bosses. They may be fired. They may be intimidated. And when, a bunch of baggage handlers go out on strike and it's a one-day action and there's just a handful of them, and that's hard. And if 100 people from the labor council show up and there's 15 painters and 12 nurses and some plumbers and a bunch of machinists, um, that means something, right? And even if it's, not organizing, not building the capacity, but that show of solidarity means something, and courage is contagious. And knowing that you're not in it alone is important. And that's something labor councils can do, even without, having people on staff and having the resources to organize. And I think that's an important and maybe underappreciated thing. I don't know if that's the sort of thing you do, but I think it can be very important.
I definitely think that that's really important, and that people do get a lot out of seeing people from other industries, and seeing that connection that, oh, I'm a postal worker and I'm in a union. You're a machinist and you're in a union, and that means we're the same. We're a part of the same movement, and I think that labor councils are a vehicle by which you can do that really kind of basic political education on the nature of class, and the fact that you definitionally as a union member are going to be part of the working class, and that you have that in common with your fellow workers, and that you should support one another when you have struggles and organizing campaigns and things like that. So I've always found that picket line visits and supporting one another's rallies has been something that people really appreciate, and seeing that more than just themselves care about their conditions of employment. I think that's been really helpful. And so, you alluded earlier in the conversation to the fact that you wrote the book in a time that's kind of similar to this one, in that there's a lot of energy around union reform, labor upsurge, labor revitalization. Ron Kerry had recently won the first ever direct election to the Teamsters international presidency, although he was pushed out not long after that for what ultimately I think the consensus was BS. The New Voices slate won the leadership of the National AFL-CIO. And so what was it like to be writing about labor at that time, and what are the differences and similarity to today?
It was, I'm going to sound like young and naive, but maybe I was, but it was kind of exciting, right? Because there really was an upsurge, and it was being noticed everywhere. And, Sweeney was pretty articulate. It was getting a lot of attention. Um, we need to not just build bridges, we need to block bridges, and he would be at, civil disobedience and things of that sort. And there was the Union Cities movement to really try to reinvigorate these labor councils. And there was a feeling that, it's an aircraft carrier, and it takes a lot, to turn an aircraft carrier. But the process had begun, and that, maybe we would see a newfound energy from the AFL-CIO at all its levels. And you kind of did for a while, right? The Union Cities, you had Union Summer to train young activists, and there was a push to kind of tool the political action, the copes. And then hopefully Manny will join us at some point, because he's kept more abreast at researching things since. My sense is that that energy kind of dissipated, that, kind of as I predicted, I think in my chapter, that, if you don't put the resources there, if these councils are just voluntary and local unions don't have to join, and free rider problems abound, it's been the same story since the 1880s. The councils just don't have the resources they need to sustain activism and organizing, and politics. And it seems to me that sort of withered, that the labor, not just the labor council, but the energy at all levels, um, receded. And it's just not as visible to me. A lot of the upsurge we see now, and I do think there's an upsurge, but it doesn't seem to be coming out of the AFL or the state feds or the labor councils, right? It's, coming from Workers United and young people who decided to organize Starbucks. It's coming out of the Amazon workers in New York. I'm very interested in SEIU's organized tens of thousands of airport workers. You just noted the UAW. I was in Tennessee not long ago and got to meet and hear from some of these Chattanooga workers, which is just astounding, right? Such a huge
Mhm.
victory in the South. But it seems like it's coming from more from internationals that have committed to organizing, that have put the resources into building the labor movement and are doing so in a very aggressive fashion. And to the extent that the AFL-CIO is involved with that, I can't really say. It doesn't seem to me that it's front and center. Um, and I'm not sure why that is, whether it's a, I don't think it's an ideological problem. I do think at all levels there's a very serious commitment to building the movement. I'm guessing it has more to do with resources, but can't say for sure. I don't know I mean, you're at the local level. I'm not sure if you have a sense of what what's happened and why that energy may have had dissipated. But to me, it seems to be coming from elsewhere.
Hey, 5 seconds. Just wanted to say that this is only possible because of our donors. If you want to see more of this, then consider donating yourself at tvlr.fm/donate.
Yes, I would definitely agree with that. The energy is not coming from the Federation, and I think that's unfortunate. Interestingly, the history of this labor council that we're a part of is that it was formed at least in the iteration before we came in. That iteration of it was formed in 1987. I don't know if there existed a labor council in North Alabama before that, but it was formed in 1987, which is kind of an interesting year to form a labor council, I think. And then it was dechartered in 2017, just before I entered the workforce and got a union job, because the unions that really held it together were the UAW at Chrysler and the paper workers at paper mills, and then the rubber workers at a tire manufacturing facility. And all of those industries left Huntsville. Dunlop closed, Chrysler closed, and the paper mill closed. And the paper mill was the last one to close. It closed, I think, in 2014. And so 3 years after that, the people who were from the paper mill, who were leading the council, did not do, the kind of basic stuff as far as, even filing with the IRS or anything like that. And so they had their tax exempt status revoked, and then the AFL revoked their charter. And then we got some unions back in 2019, and we rechartered the Labor Council, got the new charter in 2020. So, but so obviously the energy was not coming from the Labor Council here. It's coming from other places. And I spoke to, I don't know if you know of Barry Eidlin. He is also an academic, and I think back in the 90s, I think he was staff with TDU, and he said that one of the things that he's identified, or he feels like he's identified in the difference in the reform efforts, is that, not just that one situation came from the more federated bodies and the other from international, but more that in the 90s and early 2000s, it was like staff of unions were just fed up with losing, and there were enough of them, enough of the leadership and the staff of unions were fed up and wanted to try to change. And it was a really kind of top-down reform effort. Whereas today, what we're seeing, at least in his telling, and I think that this kind of tracks with the way that I'm seeing it, is that today people from the rank and file are pushing up against leaders that are maybe not doing enough, or what the rank and file thinks they should be. And so hopefully, if that kind of prognosis, or if that's the right word, if that kind of evaluation of the situation is true, then maybe there's a little bit more staying power with the bottom up kind of revitalization that will sustain these organizations into the future, and can be used to build not only their unions, but also more active and interesting federated bodies like labor councils, state feds, and the National Federation. I'm interested in what you think about kind of my and Eidlin's.
I'm not. I think sometimes this becomes an either or when really it's a both.
Mm.
So if you just take the UAW, for instance, so there's a push, locally, or not locally, but bottom up to change the leadership. But right now the organizing is I hate top down sounds like a loaded word, but I don't really think it is. But there's nationally directed campaigns to win in Chattanooga, to win in the new battery plants, to win in the South, right? That's being directed out of Detroit with
Hmm.
resources and staff and people who, are very committed to organizing the South. And then, what I see happening at the airports is also, it's a national commitment to trying to organize the airports and to do so nationwide, but also focusing on the South. And then, you know, the resources are then committed, and you get a sort of, bottom up. You get the rank and file. You get a lot of organizing that you wouldn't have had otherwise. So I think the two of them are, I don't know. I don't want to use the word dialectically interconnected, but maybe that's it. They inform each other. There's a,
Mm.
they reinforce each other. And I think it was the same way in the 30s. So there were, people in the CIO who were, trained activists from different parties, different ideological perspectives, and were crucial in, let's say the auto industry or the steel industry. But it was also dependent on, massive investments from the CIO, from the garment workers, from the mine
Mm.
workers, and organizers who could, come into those communities and could help, organize and facilitate things. So, I think it's, let a thousand flower bloom, thousand flowers bloom. I
Right.
think you need all this to happen. One thing that Idlin has talked about, and it's not original to him, I don't think, is the militant minority and the idea
Mm.
that very small groups of people can often do astounding things. And that was true in the 30s. Some of these plants would just have a small number of people who were trained activists, and then you would have coordination coming from the national. And as I said before, courage can be courageous. When, you know, 50 people in a plant of 1,000 take courageous action, a lot of other people will join in. And I think that's the same sort of thing now that, small groups of committed people at Starbucks, for instance, can, I don't know, encourage, empower many, many, many more people. So I think that's important to keep in mind. And I know Eidlin has talked about that, and I agree with that very much.
Mm. Mm. Going back to the political role of labor councils, what were some of the things that they were that some of the labor councils that you studied were able to do better than kind of the easy rut of, we endorse and we're going to write a check and that's basically it? What were some of the innovations that some of the labor councils that you studied, what were some of the innovations that they did?
Well, the one I'm most familiar with, and I'm still doing research on, I still do work on councils, but it's mostly historical, was the CIO in New York, which was a left-led union, or left-left council. So you had, you know, different unions that were affiliated with the Communist Party, sometimes the Socialist Party. So you had a lot of ideologically very progressive people in it. The Labor Council was very well resourced and committed to building a movement. You mentioned before class, right? Building a movement that spoke not just for the individual unions, but spoke for the working class. And they were committed to, advancing all sorts of things from advocating about the price of meat to getting more parks and, hospitals and, really addressing things that working class New Yorkers needed. And a lot of what they did is not rocket science, and they did it before the computers existed. They would map the union members, right? And they knew where every
Mm.
union member in New York City lived, right? They knew the wards, the districts, the blocks, and they would at election time, coordinate and have uh, union members knock on every other union member's door. I realize that you are a meat packer and I am a member of the newspaper guild, but are you aware of this election? Are you registered to
Mm.
vote? Most people don't pay attention to politics the way the two of us do. Most people are busy trying to, live their lives and feed their kids and do whatever it is that they do. And the labor councils would go and would knock on every door and register and educate, and then election day, make sure people got out to vote, make sure they had ways to get to the polls, and just had tremendous capacity. And this is in the 40s, right? There's really no reason that this can't happen again. Some councils do this better than others. At least they did when I was studying it. Milwaukee was very good at this. I'm not sure if they continued to do that. I can tell you where I live. I'm in South Jersey here. There's a labor council. We don't get any communication from the labor council. We get from my wife's union a letter that says vote for these people, and that's basically it. And the research suggests that's really not effective at all. Um, and then labor councils also have the ability, and they did this in New York, and they were doing it in Milwaukee when I was studying them in the 90s, to build their own political institutions. So you mentioned before the Democrats, and there's a long history of labor councils saying, you know what, Democrats are inadequate, and we need to have a labor party in Milwaukee or in New York City. And we have the capacity to elect people to city council, to county boards, sometimes the state assembly, because we're so concentrated. And labor councils did that historically all over the place. And then depending on the states and what the rules were, so in New York, where I'm most familiar, you can't really play at the gubernatorial level because it's statewide. You can't really play at the presidential level, but they had the ability to use fusion to cross endorse. So you would have the Labor Council in New York City endorsing the American Labor Party, structurally connected to the Labor Party, funding it the way labor parties in Europe are funded by unions, and they would endorse locally because they could really win. But when it got to the level of, say, President Roosevelt, and they couldn't really endorse or run a third-party candidate credibly, they would endorse President Roosevelt. So a union member could go into the ballot booth in New York City and vote American Labor Party for city council and maybe county and then maybe even state assembly. But then as it got further up, they would vote for President Roosevelt, the gubernatorial candidate. And what that did was it gave labor tremendous power, because President Roosevelt would not have won New York State without the American Labor Party in, I guess it was 40, 44, and 40. And the unions could point to, look, you needed our 7% of the vote. I don't know the exact number, but it was significant. And that came from the unions. And you need to answer to the unions. If not, maybe next time we will run an independent candidate. So, some of that was permitted by the unique laws that New York has and that Vermont has. There are a few states that still have these laws. But a lot of the most basic stuff was just, rolling up your sleeves and doing the grassroots organizing that is still possible, right? It's still possible to figure out who are the union members in this region. Let's go knock on some doors. It just takes capacity, and it takes planning. It takes bodies. It takes boots on the ground, but that's traditionally been something that unions can do. And I still think that's I don't know, it's a missed opportunity. You said before, in some ways, the politics is the most obvious, and you would think so, but yet it's just not done.
Right. We, so, because of my interest in, focusing on the organizing piece, we haven't yet done much political stuff here, just because I really want to push back against falling into the trap of just endorsing and not doing anything else. I've been kind of a mind that if we're going to endorse, we should really do it. And we did this time. We endorsed two union members for city council and school board. And the city council candidate won. So, we have now soon to be sworn in a union member on Huntsville City Council, one of 5 of the city councilors, the first black woman to be on Huntsville's city council. We went out and knocked doors for her. And I enjoyed it a lot more than I did when I was in, the college Democrats, Father, forgive me for I have sinned. And, being able to say, I'm a union member. I see that you're a union member. Do you want to vote for a union-endorsed union member for city council? Like, that was really, really cool. And everybody that I've talked to, or most of the people that I've talked to that did the that did the door knocking with us enjoyed it as well, and thought it was a pretty kind of unique opportunity to be able to do that. So yeah, I totally agree that, you know, when you do it and you do it well, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to really kind of shape, especially local politics.
Yeah, I used to name some of my papers and presentations the challenge of organizing the organized,
Hmm.
because with union density at 10% and private sector 6 and even lower in Alabama, right? We have tremendous challenge of organizing the unorganized, right? We all are aware of what has to be done if we're going to reverse the decline of organized labor. But we also have the challenge of organizing the organized. Just because you're in a union doesn't mean, oftentimes you don't even know you're in a union. This is one of my weird hobbies is I'll go to like see the Phillies and I know everybody there who serves me my beer is unionized. And I'll ask them, what union are they in? And they often don't even know. They say, I think
Yeah.
it has the word like food in it. They don't even know. Um, and if people aren't aware of the most basic things, like what union they're in, that's the failure of a particular union. But if people don't identify as with union consciousness, don't really know what it means to be to be a member of a union, don't understand anything about what unions do, if they just view it as something I pay dues for and something
Mm.
I get some benefits, it might as well just be an insurance fund. If people don't understand the role of the labor movement, the fellow before was talking about the role of the labor movement historically. It's like we have historical amnesia.
Mm.
If people don't understand that, then they can't really interpret the world. And if we don't explain how the world works to people, somebody else will. Tucker Carlson will,
Yeah.
or Trump will, or the Tea Party will, and they'll provide an explanation of why they're struggling that has to do with whatever it may be. The immigrants are taking your jobs, whatever. Um, so unions have a responsibility, and labor councils have a responsibility to do that, to educate people, to help them understand how the world works, to provide an alternative framework, and then to mobilize them. We know right now that on any given election, about 60% of union members vote Democratic and 40% will vote Republican. And there's no real other option at this point, so that's how it goes. But um, that 40%, there's nothing special about Trump, right? It's been like that since Nixon. And if we're going to really transform, power in this country, that number has to change, right? We have to get 65, 70, 75, 80, voting for the party that hates labor the least, right? Not all Democrats are pro-union, but the party is definitely much more pro-union than the Republican
Hmm.
Party. And the labor councils, to me, offer an opportunity to get us from that 60-40 to 70-30, 75-25. And it's really a lost opportunity. And it's not easy. You know better than I do, right? You're trying to run an organization, I'm sure, with inadequate resources, without the people and the capacity you need to really do what you would want to do. But anyway, we need to organize the organized as well. It's a big problem that unions face, and labor councils can help with that.
I agree. I agree. Yeah. I really appreciate your time. I've really enjoyed the conversation, Adam. Do you have anything that you wanted to ask him before we let him go?
I just really appreciate it. I have learned a lot as someone who, is active in my labor council, sees this potential that you've described and that Jacob's been describing as well. I think they are so important. I would encourage anyone listening, get involved with your local labor council in whatever way, you can, whatever that looks like. I think we're dealing with, down here in the South, a lot of labor councils are, not up to snuff. They have been withering for years in many cases, lack of engagement, lack of affiliation, all sorts of issues we're dealing with. But, the power and the potential that is there is so, so important. And something you said, that courage is contagious. I really enjoyed that. And I think that is something that is so true. The more we show up for one another and the more we struggle with one another, the more that builds. And you're right that we don't necessarily have to have a big check or, a big staff to show up for one another and have each other's back. And I think there is real power and value in that. So I really appreciate it. So yeah, thank you again. I didn't have any other further questions. I just, I do want to give you any opportunity you have here for final words, if you had any closing thoughts with us.
Um, uh, I want to read a quote, but you have to excuse me. I'm gonna call it up. It's from something I'm working on right now. Um, because I think it's interesting, and it's from John Commons, who was a labor historian, who also was very instrumental in helping to shape the New Deal. Nobody knows any of this history, which you mentioned me before, and I'll send it to, I forget his first name, Jacobs?
Yes,
Yeah, Jacob.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Something called Solidarity Bingo that I use when I teach labor history, because I also do labor education. And it's a interesting game that I was thinking of when I was listening to you talk about labor history, and I'll send it to you so you can maybe adapt it. It's a way to get people to learn about labor history in a fun way by playing a bingo game. But the quote I wanted to read, which not coming up on my screen here. Just give me 1 second.
Oh yeah, you're fine, and I'm really excited about this solidarity bingo as a former teacher. Yeah, any way we can make labor education fun and engaging with people and get them interested in it. And I think we have to treat adult learners just like, I wouldn't say just like children, but we have to respond to the different needs of adult learners, and people learn in different styles, different ways. So we have to be sensitive to that. There's no like one size fits all, but that's really exciting. So yes, please do send us that.
I'll send it to you, and then you can give the winner. And there usually are not winners because nobody's been taught this history. We have historical amnesia. You can give them a union-made Hershey candy bar. And people don't realize there was an actual sit-down strike at the Hershey factory in Pennsylvania, and that Hershey bar is unionized. It's from unionized workers, but it's an invisible part. Even our candy has a labor history.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll send it to you, and I think you'll find it interesting. And here's the quote. The trades union or central body, although it is the second form of organization of labor, is the first to arouse the public, and it repeats itself in all industrial countries. It represents the uprising of a class against other classes, submerging the lines that distinguish occupations. That was John Commons in 1918. And I thought of it before when the issue of class was mentioned, because what the Labor Council does represent is this moment where I'm not just a carpenter and a teacher and a plumber. I'm in this space and we're learning about each other's issues, and we can begin to fashion something beyond union consciousness. And there's nothing wrong with union consciousness. We need more of that. We need more people focusing on better wages, hours of work, and conditions. But the Labor Council offers that opportunity to kind of view things bigger and to think about class, to think about what a class can do in a region, in a state, in a country. And he said that in 1918, he was a little bit concerned, like, oh no, I don't know, these labor councils, maybe things are getting out of control. And he couldn't have been more wrong, right? I mean, labor councils kind of withered on the vine, and we're still trying to reinvigorate them over 100 years later. But I always thought that was an interesting quote, and I wanted to leave you with that. So,
well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much, and thank you again for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Watch your email. I'll send you the stuff.
All right.
Pleasure
Looking forward
talking
to it. All right, folks. Definitely check out the book if you haven't. It has apparently been reprinted. This is, I think this is the 2001 edition. So, but apparently you can get a reprint. The book is called Central Labor Councils and the Revival of American Unionism, Organizing for Justice in Our Communities by Immanuel Ness and Stuart Eimer. So check it out if you haven't. Lots of good stuff in the book.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.
Which side are you on?